You are listening to 106.7, Wilmington's Big Talker, and my name is Paul Vallone. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Sunday at 5 p.m., as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, Castle Doctrine at Stand Your Ground, the expansion of concealed carry to state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. A couple of weeks ago, I put out a letter to Grassroots North Carolina members detailing exactly what they would see in the coming weeks, namely a so-called universal background check bill from Nancy Pelosi, our new Democrat Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, as well as an assault weapon ban, and I use that word in quotes, assault weapon, bill from Dianne Feinstein and from somebody or other who I will talk about later, a national red flag disarmament bill. One of my readers responded by calling me a fearmonger in apparent denial of what I predicted. Well, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. In terms of federal gun control, all three have been introduced. In terms of state legislation, the General Assembly convened only long enough to swear in legislators and elect leadership, but almost certainly we will see gun control introduced in Raleigh when they reconvene at the end of the month. The most likely option being yet another red flag disarmament bill right here in North Carolina, a concept for which, by the way, some Republicans are making favorable noises. Our primary topic today will be the opening salvos fired by Democrats, and a few Republicans in Congress in the war against the Second Amendment being waged all around us. And in our second and third segments of the show, we will hear commentary on those salvos from noted gun rights writer David Codrea, who blogs at The War on Guns and who regularly writes for AmmoLand.com and Firearms News. In particular, I recommend you check out David Codrea's latest piece in yesterday's AmmoLand.com entitled Feinstein Ban on Semi-Autos Deliberately Undermines Security of a Free State. Now, although gun control bills are introduced in all sessions of Congress, and in many sessions of Congress represent little or no threat because they won't go anywhere, I'm here to tell you that this is not one of those sessions. Among a variety of gun control introduced thus far, three represent the greatest threat. First, there is Speaker Moonbat, that's Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Moonbat, her favorite, called the Universal Background Check Bill, sponsored by Representative Mike Thompson, Democrat, California. Yes, People's Republic of California. We will talk more about it later with David Codrea, but as David Kopel of the Independence Institute writes in a gun blog called The Volokh Conspiracy, and I quote, H.R. 8 requires that loans, gifts, and sales of firearms be processed by a gun store. The same fees, paperwork, and permanent record-keeping apply as to buying a new gun from the store. If you loan a gun to a friend without going to a gun store, that's a loan, the penalty is the same as for knowingly selling a gun to a convicted violent felon. Likewise, when the friend returns the gun, another trip to the gun store is necessary upon pain of felony. And, of course, all transactions through dealers would be registered through the computerized National Instant Background Check System, or NICS, because, of course, registration is the key. What the opposition wants is to require all transactions to go through NICS in order that when they are able to turn NICS into a proper gun registration system, they know exactly where to find the guns they intend to ban. But, you say, the Brady Law prohibits NICS from being used for gun registration. Well, as I will detail later, anyone who believes NICS can't be made into a system of gun registration should understand that it already has. Under the Clinton administration, then Attorney General Janet Reno refused to expunge transaction records for purchases as required by the Brady Law, giving the FBI a de facto permanent record of gun buyers. That practice was reversed only once George W. Bush was elected and appointed John Ashcroft as Attorney General. Second, we have Dianne Feinstein's perennial proposed ban on so-called assault weapons, which, as you may recall, don't exist. Assault weapons is a contrived name invented by the gun control movement to confuse you with machine guns. Assault rifles are military, fully automatic firearms. One depression of the trigger continues to fire rounds until the trigger is released. A machine gun. We are not talking about machine guns. Sponsored by Senators Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, and Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, and Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, this bill would ban far more semi-automatic firearms and otherwise go far beyond the now expired 1994 ban. Now, I haven't read all 125 pages yet, but here is what they have to say about the bill, along with just a couple of things I picked up from my quick read. This is from their own press release. Quote, assault weapons and high-capacity magazines are deadly and dangerous weapons of war that belong on battlefields, not our streets. They have no purpose for self-defense or hunting and no business being in our schools, churches, and malls. By passing this legislation, Congress can honor the memory of the beautiful lives cut short by military-style assault weapons in Newtown, Parkland, Las Vegas, San Bernardino, and far too many other American cities. This is the year for my colleagues to turn our rhetoric into reality and finally end America's gun violence epidemic. This, of course, despite the fact that the last assault weapon ban by the ATF's own admission did nothing to impact crime. Key provisions, again according to the press release, bans the sale, manufacture, transfer, and importation of 205 military-style assault weapons by name. Owners may keep their existing weapons, how kind of them. Bans any assault weapon. Now, this is the one not by name, okay? The 205 is a misnomer because it bans far, far more than that. Bans any assault weapon that accepts a detachable ammunition magazine and has one or more military characteristics, including, this is one. Now, the last one was two. This is one. A pistol grip, forward grip, barrel shroud, threaded barrel, or a folding or telescoping stock. Owners may keep existing weapons. How kind of them. Bans magazines and other ammunition feeding devices that hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition, which allows shooters to quickly fire many rounds without needing to reload. Owners may keep existing magazines. However, as you will see later, owners may not transfer those existing magazines. Exemptions to the bill. The bill exempts by name more than 2,200 guns for hunting, household defense, or recreational purposes, meaning they are now naming which guns you may own for now. The bill includes a grandfather clause that exempts all weapons lawfully possessed at the date of enactment, sort of, except that it requires a background check for any future sale, trade, or gifting of an assault weapon covered by the bill. Requires that grandfathered assault weapons are stored using a secure gun storage or safety device or trigger lock, meaning you have to render them unusable for self-defense, and prohibits the transfer of high-capacity ammunition magazines. Bans bump fire stocks and other devices that allow semi-automatic weapons to fire at fully automatic rates. Bans stocks that are otherwise foldable or adjustable in any manner that operates to reduce the length, size, or other dimension or enhances the concealability of the firearm. bans assault pistols that weigh 50 or more ounces when unloaded, a policy included in the original 1994 assault weapon ban. Bans assault pistol stabilizing braces that transform pistols into assault rifles by allowing the shooter to shoulder the weapon, yada, yada, yada. Just to give you one tiny detail of how misleading this bill is, it classifies as an assault pistol any handgun with a detachable magazine, which is all semi-automatic handguns, which has a threaded barrel. Now, meaning any gun used for, say, USPSA pistol competition that has a muzzle compensator to reduce recoil, or any gun intended to be fitted with a sound suppressor would now be banned. Again, this is just one tiny example. I'm quite certain that the hidden ramifications of the bill would ban a large proportion of all legally owned guns. As for the third bill, we'll discuss that in the next segments. Right now, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. We will return in a moment with our guest, gun writer David Codrea, and his comments on what the Democrats have in mind for you. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Our distinguished guest today is gun rights writer David Codrea, who blogs at The War on Guns, and whose gun rights articles are regularly featured in Guns Magazine, The Truth About Guns, and Firearms News, among other. Oh, and I forgot Ammoland.com, which I strongly recommend that everybody subscribe to as an excellent news clipping source on gun rights, guns, and a whole variety of things regarding federal gun legislation, and today we are going to discuss what is going on in Washington. Welcome, David.
Paul, you said distinguished guest. I was looking around. Anyway, I'm here, and just to correct something right up front, I now write for Ammoland and Firearms News. So those are the two places where you can find my articles. And, of course, The War on Guns, Notes from the Resistance, waronguns.com is my blog, which is the clearinghouse for everything that I write.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I just saw your excellent article in Firearms News just this past month, and nice job. Anyways, well, I wrote a letter to GRNC's members a little more than a week ago describing what was about to happen. All the gun control that was about to pass, well, not pass necessarily, but be introduced. And one recipient called me a fearmonger. Well, as I said earlier in the show, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. When anti-gunners tell you they're right, believe them. So, David, please tell us what the Democrats, who now control the United States House of Representatives, have in mind for gun rights supporters. What have they introduced so far?
Well, what they have in mind, of course, is total disarmament. But I'd be a fearmonger if I just said that. So let's take a look at what they're introducing, because they have promised they're going to be coming at us with a vengeance on what they call "quote unquote" common sense gun safety laws, which are merely incremental steps down or slides down the slippery slope towards their previously stated goal of total disarmament. And we can get into that. What we've seen so far is we have seen Nancy Pelosi and Mike Thompson on the House side of things hold a press release with Gabby Giffords and Shannon Watts and David Hogg and all the usual suspects to go after what they want to represent as a universal background check bill, which is not. The whole thing is a foundation built on lies that we can get into. And the second part of the 1-2 punch is we saw from the Senate side, we saw Dianne Feinstein come out with her usual gaggle of suspects to come up with a new quote-unquote assault weapons ban. And again, these are both things that should be considered intolerable acts, because they go to the heart of infringing on the right of the people to keep and bear arms and making certain that the vision that the founders had has been absolutely eradicated by oath-breaking subversives in the House and in the Senate.
Well, of course, that's what they want to do to eradicate American culture and the Constitution. But before I want to talk more about that universal background checks bill, and I mean, how could anybody be against universal background checks, right? We'll talk about that. But just as a quick list here, we have in the House H.R. 8 from Mike Thompson for the universal background checks. We have H.R. 33 from Bobby Rush to prohibit transfer of a firearm at a gun show by a person who's not a licensed dealer. We have H.R. 435 to provide a coordinated national research program to determine the nature, causes, consequence, and prevention of violence and unintended injury and death relating to gun ownership, use, and trafficking, and for other purposes. What's the worst that could possibly happen there, right? And then, of course, we have in the Senate, as you mentioned, Senate Bill 66 from Dianne Feinstein, her perennial so-called assault weapon ban. Let's talk first about that universal background checks bill. I mean, who's against background checks? We don't want bad people getting guns, right? What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, well, the worst that could happen is ending private sales, and particularly as the Democrats continue to gain a majority, ultimately getting rid of the Tiahrt Amendment and allowing the records that are compiled through the 4473s that currently go through NICS. We could see that database that everybody fears that would allow for a registration database of gun owners.
There we go. Registration.
And then, of course, Paul, as we expand on the number of disqualifiers, the so-called red flag laws, the ERPOs, the extreme risk protection orders, the mental health blanket dragnet bills that are out there.
We'll talk about more about the extreme risk protection orders momentarily. I want to just settle in on universal background checks because that is something which, to the uninitiated, sounds like a reasonable thing. However, as you correctly noted, what this really is intended to do is to set up the beginnings of universal gun registration because, of course, you can't ban what you can't find. And so what they are really looking for with these universal background check bills is to make sure that all transactions go through the computerized national instant background check system, which could be used as a national gun registration system. And anybody who says that, well, NICS can't be used as gun registration should understand that it already has. Because as you and I both know, Attorney General Janet Reno under the Clinton administration was refusing to expunge the transaction records under NICS and keeping them in violation of the Brady Law in order to create a de facto gun registration system. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and I've also seen other allegations published, I believe, by Gun Owners of America, where ATF people had been coming in and scanning documents at the FFLs. And there's nothing, of course, to stop that from going on to their own personal computer systems and probably ATF computer systems. I don't think that that's been traced back so far, but the potential is there. And as the majority is there, part of the prohibition on establishing the database, that comes from not being able to allocate funds in the budget appropriations negotiations. And as we've seen, as the majority shifts, you can shift the ability to, pass or withhold certain things within appropriations. And case in point, Chuck Schumer has continually blocked the ability to have funding for clearing your name and getting your rights recognized again.
Right. Yes. Perfect example. But I would note that even in addition to potentially reported cases where the ATF is copying or scanning records from dealers, okay, the fact is there has already been a lawsuit filed against Janet Reno, and there is absolutely no doubt that they were retaining those transaction records in violation of the Brady Law. And in fact, the procedure was only reversed under John Ashcroft during the Bush administration, Attorney General John Ashcroft, after Bush took over. So once again, anybody who says that universal background checks can't be used for gun registration should understand that it already has. Now, we're going to have about 2 minutes here, but let's start on what the universal background check bill means. What does it contain exactly?
As far as I'm concerned, it contains a pack of lies. They start out with lies when Gabby Gifford calls it a critical first step towards strengthening America's gun laws. This is the first step. We've had citizen disarmament laws, the beginning of the Republic with the black codes and the slave codes to NFA 34, GCA 68, and so on, but they always present it as a good first step. What we see is what it will not do is it will not bring in the population that we're most concerned about, the gangbangers, the people that are committing all the multiple murders that we see every weekend in headlines from Chicago and Baltimore and places like that, because those people bypass the dealers through the black market. What we're going to see, what it's going to do, is it is simply going to be another prior restraint on law-abiding people. And here's the thing. If you really wanted to greenlight a good sale, there has been a proposal out there for many, many years called BIDS, the Blind Identification System, and what that does is that will tell you whether or not a sale can go through, and then no record is created. So there is no possibility or potential for that to be abused, building a registration list.
I would note also that, and I mean, I have not seen, as a matter of fact, I looked on congress.gov and I didn't see the text for this bill. It's not posted yet. I don't know. Have you actually seen the text for this particular universal background check? I know what they
yes,
typically have in them.
And as a matter of fact, I linked to it on my ammoland.com piece. It doesn't have the number on it, but it was taken from Mike Thompson's website. And
right.
if you go to my ammoland.com piece, or just go to Mike Thompson, I'm sure he's got it. It's mikethompson.house.gov, and he's got the bill on there. It's the 16th Congress first session. It's HR, then it has a blank on it. I'm not sure that it has been put through the National Archives site yet to where you can get the full text there. It wasn't there.
I'm going to have to take a break here right now, David, but we're going to get right back to that after our break. Folks, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. After our break, we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Malone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Our distinguished guest today, although he won't let himself be called distinguished, is gun rights writer David Codrea, who blogs at The War on Guns and who regularly is featured in Firearms News and ammoland.com, an excellent news clipping service I heartily recommend to anyone who is interested in firearms or gun rights. Welcome back, David. Let's talk more about federal legislation, shall we?
Oh, one of my favorite subjects.
We've been talking about H.R. 8, which is Mike Thompson's bill, highly promoted by Nancy Pelosi in the U.S. House, to create so-called universal background checks, which I think we both understand is a prelude to creating a national gun registration system on the premise that you can't ban what you can't find. So H.R. 8, I mean, what kind of stuff would this thing do? And as I said during our break, I understand that that's not all they want. I understand that what's in the bill now is likely it's going to be different if this thing were to pass. But people need to understand what concrete stuff is going to happen to them if this legislation passes. What does H.R. 8 do?
Aside from the potential for the abuse that we talked about, Dave Kopel actually put together a very good piece on the Volokh conspiracy that I suggest people look up, and he goes through a summary of what H.R. 8 will do, and first thing he says is that it requires that loans, gifts, and sales of firearms be processed by a gun store. Okay? He talks about there's a partial self-defense exemption, but the narrowness endangers domestic violence victims. He says that it contains a handgun ban for young adults. Okay, it would prohibit a 20-year-old woman who lives on her own from acquiring a handgun for self-defense in her home, such as buying from a relative or borrowing it from a friend.
And by the way, that is right now perfectly legal. Although you have to be 21 to buy a firearm from a federally licensed dealer, possessing a handgun under the age of 21, I believe it's the age of 18 or above, is perfectly legal. Correct?
He says exorbitant fees may be imposed by regulation. Okay, he says that while there's limited exemptions for hunting, trapping, or fishing, there aren't for ranching or farming. And so it goes on to do that, outlawing gun sharing on public and private property. Mike Thompson has, like I think I told you over the break, a copy of the text of the bill, although the one that I've seen so far does not have a number on it, and I believe it'd be the Library of Congress website that will have the complete bill once it's up and the version that they're going to be presenting.
The bottom line is these things make sure that whatever transfer takes place, it could be in some cases with universal background checks laws that have been passed in some of the states under ballot initiatives, thanks to Michael Bloomberg and company. Some of these things, if I hand somebody my firearm at a gun range, okay, just to allow them to inspect it, use it, shoot it, check it out, whatever, we have to do a transfer, and it has to be registered through the National Instant Check System. That's how draconian some of these things are. All right, so in the Senate, we've got another bill, this one for so-called assault weapon ban by Dianne Feinstein. Which bill is that's Senate? I guess it's Senate bill. I lost the number here. Do you have it offhand?
No, I don't work on numbers. I work on my temper. And basically, what she's done is she's introduced this with Chris Murphy of Connecticut and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, because I guess they're not satisfied with what they've done to their state. And then Chuck Schumer and a whole gaggle of other usual suspects have gotten behind it. And like I'd said earlier, it's stage 2 of the 1-2 punch, with the first one being ending private transfers. They said Blumenthal was talking about this. He was making the case for it. He says, assault weapons and high-capacity magazines are deadly and dangerous weapons of war that belong on battlefields, not on our streets. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. That is exactly the argument that the government put forth, government attorneys in U.S. v. Miller, and the Supreme Court acknowledged that the Second Amendment protects the ownership of military-type weapons that are appropriate for use in an organized militia. Okay.
Well, there you go, being all constitutional again.
Yeah, they wanted the citizenry to have the weapons of war, because otherwise, if you're going out in the field to meet a professionally trained army and you're not similarly equipped and trained, you're going to get slaughtered. What the hell is the purpose of having a Second Amendment if you're going to send unarmed people out to be slaughtered with, pitchforks and things like that?
You have no idea how many gun owners and people, even members of my organization, have said, well, the citizen militia can't be an effective deterrent to governmental tyranny. They're not well enough trained. But we'll save that conversation for another day.
That's a whole nother discussion we could have.
We'll take a whole show for that one, and then barely touch on the subject. By the way, that bill is Senate Bill 66, a bill to regulate assault weapons, which don't exist, to ensure that the right to keep and bear arms is not unlimited, and for other purposes. Oh, I hate that, other purposes. Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, and she has 28 co-sponsors. I haven't checked, but I presume and hope they're all Democrats. But of course, and speaking of Democrats and Republicans, all of these bills we've discussed are from Democrats. Now, we have a Republican Congress and a Republican president, and so surely the Republicans will stop all the gun control, won't they, David?
Well, there are several Republican sponsors to the Pelosi-Thompson bill, and this of course, is what you run into. Again, this is what you run into when you have the approach of, well, if we don't vote for them, we'll get a Democrat, and I would rather have an enemy that I know is an enemy rather than the enemy within who you might think is your friend, who's going to hurt you from inside. And this is a big mistake that we have allowed to happen, and the only way to rectify and to correct that is to stop supporting quisling Republicans.
Hear, hear.
What are you going to do? I mean, there have been Republicans that have proposed gun bans. There have been Republicans that go along with it. There are Republicans that are proposing, red flags and ERPOs.
Yeah, speaking of quisling Republicans, let's talk about one particular quisling named Marco Rubio, Little weasel. Anyways, he has introduced a bill for Senate Bill 7 for Extreme Risk Protection Order and Violence Prevention Act of 2019. This is a Republican red flag bill. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
This has been something that he's been going after for quite some time, and he's been doing it, unfortunately, with the blessing of the National Rifle Association. And what these things do is
now I'm truly shocked, I tell you. Shocked, not the NRA. They would never promote gun control.
They allow people who have not even been charged with a crime, let alone convicted of one, of being disarmed based on the say-so of somebody, whether it's a family member, whether it's a police officer. The antis are trying to expand it to include the boyfriend loophole. So apparently, if you take a girl out and she's mad at you, I guess she can report you. There are all kinds of other things that, what if a family member is, mad at you or interested in the inheritance, or what if a police officer is looking for some kind of probable cause or whatever.
But of course, we have due process of law, right? You get your day in court.
That's exactly what they say. And this is how
after your guns were already confiscated in an ex parte hearing where you don't get an opportunity to participate, and you may not even get notice that this ex parte hearing has occurred until the police show up at your door at 5 a.m. like they did in Maryland to confiscate your guns. And that, by the way, was the first case of death by red flag law.
Yeah, then you take a look at some of the people that might want to go ahead and approve your guns being taken away from you, whether it is a politically motivated judge, or whether it is somebody from a psychological association that is knee-jerk anti-gun. And here's a question that I've asked about these people that bar you for psychological reasons. What are your chances of having such a person ever then take the risk of saying, okay, well, now we've reviewed this again and he can have his rights back because we think that he'll be okay? Do you really think that anybody so inclined is going to put their reputation in risk or on the line and risk saying this person is okay? I just don't see that happening. Yeah. I don't see those protections. But the bottom line is this is not true due process. And Paul,
here.
If I'm too dangerous to have a gun, then you're an idiot to leave me out on the street. It's like
I've said that many times, and I totally agree. Rather, unfortunately, we are out of time right now, David. Tell us again, where can we find your stuff? Where's your blog?
The best place to go is waronguns.com.
Waronguns.com.
War on Guns, and that's the aggregator for everything that I do.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, David. I appreciate you bringing us up to speed on the current threats. Folks, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. We'll take a short break, after which we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. Freedom, today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. This just in from the gun control laboratory known as Britain. As you may recall, following the Dunblane school massacre in Scotland in 1996, the UK finally finished what it had been moving toward all along, namely the near-complete ban on private ownership of firearms. Now, this is an island nation with tightly controlled borders, which has become, in the experience of this observer who has spent plenty of time there, a virtual police state. A state in which random searches are common and where, under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, police can detain suspects without charging them for long periods, and where in years past illegal guns had become so common that the Times of London once referred to them as, and I quote, fashion accessories for criminals. So let's check back on the world's largest gun control laboratory, shall we? How is that near-complete gun ban working for them? Well, The good news is that gun crime is down. The bad news, of course, is that homicide in 2018, particularly London homicide, is at a 10-year high. Now, I grant you that at 134 murders, it is still lower than the 2018 homicide rate experienced by America's own gun control laboratory, otherwise known as the City of Chicago, where 418 people were killed in 2018. But given that London's homicide rate increased by 15% over the past 10 years, while Chicago's rate decreased by 20% in a single year, a year in which, incidentally, Chicago had been forced to begin issuing concealed handgun permits to lawful citizens, and where such citizens had begun using them to deter violent crime, it stands to reason that in the near future, London's murder rate will eventually exceed our own. Incidentally, in April of last year, both the British online news service The Independent and our own USA Today noted that for the first time, London's murder rate exceeded that of New York City. And lest anyone claim gun control is the solution for mass public homicides, I draw your attention to a headline from just over a week ago when the BBC noted, and I quote, "London violence, 2 dead, 4 hurt in knife and gun attack." Meanwhile, another online British news service, Express, just 2 weeks ago, ran the headline, and I quote, "Wild West Britain. Chilling figures reveal horrific extent of UK 2018 knife crime epidemic." Yes, indeed, the news account highlights the fatal stabbings of 272 people and more than 1,800 reported attacks from January to November of 2018. And who compiled those stats? A group calling itself Anti-Knife UK. Yes, you heard that right. After banning guns, the Brits are now busily pursuing knife control. Apparently, Brits can no longer be trusted with sharp objects. I have it on good authority, by the way, that they will soon move to ban matches. Elsewhere in Britain, an October headline in The Independent fairly screamed, "Knife crime hits record high in England and Wales as violence soars," statistics reveal. Once again, it seems that gun crime is down, but homicide is up sharply. The Office for National Statistics, or ONS, said that police recorded 39,332 knife offenses, the highest number on record, and an annual increase of 12% in the year to June 2018. In the same period, overall violence rose by 19% to almost 1.5 million crimes, homicide increased by 14%, and robbery by 22%. But are even those figures accurate? Not exactly. After all, when gun control advocates are faced with the dismal failure of their utopian policies, how do they generally respond? They cook the books, of course. Says The Independent, the real total of knife crime is likely to be higher as Greater Manchester police figures were excluded by the ONS because a review of its data found it was undercounting offenses. If its figures were included, it would bring the total in England and Wales to 41,884 knife or sharp instrument offences. Incidentally, the BBC, that's British Broadcasting Corporation, reports that for the year ending March 2017, knives were used as instruments of homicide roughly 6 times more frequently than guns. A criminologist would call this substitution effect, in which those bent on mayhem denied one implement of destruction simply turned to another. Meanwhile, those who actually obey the law, denied any means for self-protection, are preyed upon at ever-increasing rates. Please remember all of this the next time some idiot at the office pontificates that we should ban guns because, after all, the rate of British gun crime is so much smaller than our own. But enough of Britain's success. Back to the agenda to bring still more gun control right here to America. You may recall that in December, the Trump administration announced the long-awaited ban on so-called bump stocks, the devices which use a gun's recoil to pull the trigger at a higher rate than an unaided finger might manage, but which still only fire one bullet for each pull of the trigger. Still a semi-automatic firearm, not fully automatic. You may also recall that many, including the NRA, called for banning the devices via regulatory action by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I presume that the NRA was offering what I call preemptive concession, conceding the point to the opposition in order to look reasonable and to lose a little less than what you would have lost under the opposition's original proposal. Unfortunately, as we have seen in Seattle or in Washington with their ballot initiative for universal background checks and elsewhere, preemptive concession doesn't work. Given the proverbial half a loaf, gun control advocates invariably gobble it up and immediately begin clamoring for more. And in this case, the NRA was unpleasantly surprised to learn that the BATFE simply reversed all previous determinations that bump stocks were not machine guns and blithely reinterpreted the language of the 1934 National Firearms Act to include them, in effect saying, never mind what it says, this is what it means. The most unpleasant surprise is that by reclassifying them as machine guns, they exploited the Hughes Amendment to the otherwise pro-gun 1986 Firearms Owners Protection Act, or McClure-Volkmer Act, which banned private ownership of any machine gun manufactured after May of 1986. Translated, that means that anybody who owns one of these bump stocks now has until sometime in late March to either turn in or destroy private property they purchased in the good faith that the BATFE had previously said they were legal. Now, maybe you neither own nor care about bump stocks. Most people don't. But this isn't about bump stocks. It is about the dangerous precedent set when a regulatory agency, bereft of any legislation passed by the duly elected representatives of the people, decides to change the meaning of existing law to ban whatever guns it pleases. And I can assure you that if the BATFE succeeds in banning bump stocks using this technique, you will soon see it applied to other guns the very next time an anti-gun administration takes the reins. But don't cut up your bump stocks just yet. By all interpretations, the regulation represents the taking of property without due process of law, as guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment. Indeed, in a recent show featuring gun rights lawyer John Pierce, I predicted that in a year or two, we would find ourselves right back where we were before the bump stock ban. And in fact, there have now been at least 3 lawsuits filed to place an injunction on the implementation of the ban, including GOA, that's Gun Owners of America, GOA versus Whitaker, Guides versus BATFE, and Firearms Policy Coalition versus Whitaker. Now, Gun Owners of America recently scored something of a small victory in defeating a governmental effort to dismiss the injunction on the argument that if the case is settled in months, gun owners will already have destroyed the devices and the win would be moot. I'm happy to say that next week, our show, Guns, Politics, and Freedom, will feature as our guest, Eric Pratt, the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, who will discuss the lawsuit. Meanwhile, I am Paul Vallone. You have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, where each Sunday at 5 p.m. as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. Please check out our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop at hyattguns.com. Also check out my website, gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, where you can find both my writings and earlier editions of the show. See you next Sunday at 5.